So the official Heritage Day celebrations are going to be unfolding at Mqheleng Stadium. That's in Vicksburg in the Free State. But we're asking you, as we build up to that, to share with us as part of our question of the day, which aspects of your own heritage you want to share with the rest of the country. Make sure to make your views heard. Send us your comments, perhaps better yet, some of your pictures. We'll bring up the graphic with some of the details for you in just a moment, where you can send through some of your views at SABC News_TV is the handle on X. Otherwise, you can give us a call on our common numbers. But as you do that, let's bring you this discussion. World-renowned South African visual artist Esther Mahlangu will be honored with a poem titled For Gogo Esther Mahlangu. This poem pays homage to Mahlangu as a symbol of cultural pride, who's demonstrated the ways in which our cultural practices are able to sustain and preserve us. The Soweto and KZN poet responsible for this work is Mandisa Vundla, who also is a well-known artist for her prowess in slam poetry. She's also an educator and runs a poetry development agency that's focused on improving the quality of the spoken word, known as Poetry Zone ZA. She also mentors young people who are emerging poets through the Brave Spoken Youth Project, and was actually listed as a Million Guardian 200 Young Leader back in 2022. Her spoken word album entry, or poetry album, A Love Song for Miriam Makeba, inspired by Miriam Makeba, was also recently released. The artist herself, Mandisa Vundla, joins us now in studio for her work, for her reflections, and later on for a special performance. Welcome to the SABC. Great to see you.
Thank you so much.
And it's always such a great opportunity to slow down a bit and speak about these important issues, which also really pour into our lives outside of the ebb and flow of everyday living.
True.
Heritage Day for you, I know there's always a common question we ask around what it means, but I think this year in particular, a lot of us have been forced to grapple with what being African might mean and what it doesn't mean. I wonder if you have any thoughts around that.
For me, it's really, I just think of my grandmother, and I think of my mother, and I think of my identity, like who am I as Mandisa Vundla, That question, I grapple with it a lot because we are of the generation that went to school and learned English and lost our languages. And so Heritage Day for me is a reflection to say, beyond this barrier, how else am I preserving my identity? How am I true to myself when I write? How do I write? Somebody once said to me, you write so South African. Like, I'm such an embodiment of the experiences that I live, but also praying, always just being thankful to our ancestors, to our guides for ushering us in and keeping us alive to date, I always think about that first, to say, how am I anchored and how am I grounded? And who do I come from? Who do I come from beyond just my immediate bloodline? The women that I come from culturally within this community, within this arts community, who do I look up to? We spoke about the album for A Love Song for Miriam Makeba, and I look at her as an ancestral guide. I look at her traditionally, and Gogo Esther Mahlangu, women who didn't finish school, but whose cultural upbringing preserves their livelihood. Like, who would we have been if we were never colonized? I look at Esther and I look at Miriam, and I'm just like, okay, you're on the right track. You've got poetry, and you didn't go to school for poetry, but you grew into this craft. So that's also ancestry. I've taken that from somebody within my bloodline. I just don't know who. So honoring myself, waking up every single day saying, hi, my name is Mandisa Vundla. I am a poet everywhere I go. That is the way I identify, and that's how I honor the gifts that I've been given.
Fascinating. As you're speaking, you're reminding me of something that Maya Angelou once said, and of course she's a poet, author in her own right, when she was asked how she kind of deals with the nervousness of having to perform. And she spoke about summoning people who've come before her, before she goes onto stage. And she literally says, all the women who've walked this path, the people in my own family, those I know, those I don't. She says, I walk up to the stage and I say, come with me. Go onto the stage with me. How important is it for people to start thinking about ways in which we could root ourselves in something other than ourselves? Because I think that's kind of the sentiment I'm getting from you.
Identity is broad, right? If I'm rooted in who I am, what is an extension of the thing that I do? Right? How else do I express poetry? It's healing, right? How else do I express my identity when I think of just being an artist and living out my artistic career? It's giving back. You know, culturally we say ubuntu, umuntu ngabantu. You know, so within your communities, how are you giving back? I mentor, you know, I give back and I mentor. I take on young emerging poets, and sometimes I give back at no cost, you know, and I guide those. As I have guides, I become a guide to those who are emerging and who are coming into themselves. So I think it's just thinking about who you are when you think about the broader self, the extended self, not just the immediate self, and what's your contribution to humanity. Yeah.
Sure. Language is an incredibly important aspect of preserving culture, of giving, of receiving, many might say. And I mentioned earlier on, as we started the show, that I was reminded of comments from the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, who wrote in Kikuyu. He's a Kenyan author. And his whole idea was, you know, we need to actively write in indigenous languages because these things don't live on their own. They breathe through us. And I imagine that's a big kind of driving force for your own kind of work.
It is. I mean, just looking at the body of work, A Love Song for Miriam Makeba, right? So because I write in English, I open my with a prelude that says, English is the master, I am the slave. I write poems like a master. I don't know if they will ever reach the slaves. And in the choruses, I feature African musicians who write in indigenous languages, who sing in indigenous languages to further communicate the message that I cannot reach, right? So I feature Coco chants naturally when she sings, Coco Matala chants. I feature Zulu and Tubatsimpo Muloi. It's Sesotho, it's Xhosa, it's Zulu. It's knowing that I can't access it the way I would like to, but I write very black. How else can I get other people to translate that work? And I think just speaking about that, we're going into Poetry Africa, which is like the biggest poetry festival in South Africa that's running. And just looking at the celebration of it's going to be running from the 3rd of October up until the 12th of October at UJ and at UKZN. And just looking at the curatorial, the poets that have been curated into the lineup, you know, thinking about the poets that are there, that are from the continent, seeing that they're back in circuit and being anxious to just watch and listen to him, you know. The festival opens with a tribute to a memorial lecture to Ntate Khositsile, you know, who was our then poet laureate, the late poet laureate, you know. And for me, that's also legacy, and that's also history, and that's also culture. So I look forward to things like that, where I'm like, in my community, how else do I anchor myself with the festivals and with the performances and the curatorial work that's being done and curated by UJ and the Center for Creative Arts. So it's about community work. It takes a village.
Yeah, it certainly does.
It takes a village. It takes a village.
I'm intrigued by what you just said. You say you write very black.
Yes.
What does that mean?
I really write from the lived black experience of a South African woman waking up every single day to leave her house, you know. There's a poem I have for Uyinene. For instance, let's just look at the body of work that A Love Song for Miriam features. There's Uyinene, which really talks about my anxiousness when it comes to leaving the house. And I think of Uyinene and the mundane, routine path of just going to the post office. I could be going to buy bread. But we are living under anxious times and anxious conditions as black women in South Africa, wherever you are, actually, you know. And my fear is embodied in Uyinene and on teaching men how to behave, you know. I question the role of black men in perpetuating this danger. Like, I'm not afraid because I'm afraid as a black woman living amongst black men who are meant to protect me, but I'm afraid and anxious navigating the spaces they're navigating to be like, I'm not really sure. It's in Crossestratangera. You know, that's in there.
Before you move on, just for context for our viewers, I mean, Uyinene is a UCT student. She went to the post office and sadly, that's how she died. It later emerged that a worker at the post office is the one who murdered her in the most gruesome way, you know, quite frankly. And of course, it precipitated commentary, protest action, and I think a foundation in her name. So just so our viewer is
that's correct. And then you look at Esther and Miriam. Right. When you look at them, there are so many parallels between the both of them, and just how they're internationally acclaimed. As a writer, you have to look back and say, how do I stabilize myself in this very trialing industry? Like, there is no you can't confirm where you'll be tomorrow. You know, you just wake up today and you do today's bit and you hope for the best for tomorrow. But you're like, hey man, you come from Miriam though. You come from one of the women who was one of the highest paid international musicians at the time in the US. What do you mean? You know, you're afraid or you're nervous, you know, if today is not going okay. You come from Esther, you know, like, you're gonna be good, you know? And those are the poems about there. And then there's Revolutionary Writers, which is an ode to all the revolutionary writers. People who are writing and creating work that are creating like these small revolutions. I believe in like these small revolutions where you look in the mirror and you're like, somebody said something. And that thing is haunting and it stays with me. So Revolutionary Writers is for everybody who's doing life-changing, impactful and meaningful work that makes me wake up and say, I'm going to be okay being a poet. We're still as a sector on the outskirts of the cultural industry in South Africa, but we're still paving our way and our time is coming as well. So I'm going to be just fine.
Sure. And it's great to hear that, because I imagine there are days where sometimes you're visited by what feels like an existential crisis.
Yeah.
You know, there's this great calling to the work itself. It feels fulfilling. It leaves you really filled in your soul. But there's also the reality of living in a capitalist society that needs you to get by.
That's very true. And that's the predicament and the conflict.
Yeah.
Should I continue being an artist? Maybe I should put this thing on the side. But are you serving yourself holistically when you do that? So you have to move through the challenges, with the challenges, and they don't get any easier. You know, I read something about entrepreneurship. It said, you know, the challenges that you're experiencing when you start, get used to them because they're always going to be there. They're not going to go away. And so you have to just be more resilient, and you always have to like look to your community, you know, to say, okay, cool, maybe I don't have strength today, but who's performing tomorrow? Who's releasing what tomorrow? What can I draw from the festivals that are happening around me? And so you borrow your vulnerability from other people who have it, and from other people who are performing it, and from other people who are able to move through this life just awake and aware of who they are. And so that's my community. You know, the Poetry Africa, the Word and Sounds, the Hear My Voices, you know, the places that have really been holding up the poetry sector. It's like nobody else could understand it, but we are growing. So.
Sure. Fascinating. I'm going to get in trouble. I have to ask you, where do we connect with you? Where do we find your work? You're going to perform for us in just a moment, but I just have to get this out the way.
Yes, please find me on all social media platforms at Mandisa Vundla, MANDIVEE, Vundla. On social media, it's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Awesome stuff.
And you can catch my album on a love song for Miriam Makeba on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music. Thank you.
Shameless plug on a Tuesday. All right. Mandisa Vundla, thanks very much indeed. I'm going to allow you to move on swiftly as you get ready to perform for us one of those poems we've just spoken about, in honor of course, Gogo Esther Mahlangu. And of course, this is going to be part of our focus for much of the time we have together, especially because there's going to be so many reflections around those who've come before us, those who, I suppose, are yet to come in many ways, who are going to take in the different performances